Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Meepleville Meets. Today, we are talking to Greg May, who is the founder of the Uncommons board game cafe in New York City, and also Hex and Company, another board game in New York City. So please welcome Greg May. Hello, Greg.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Happy to be here.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. So first thing, I want to just go ahead and get it out there. Congratulations on a relatively new dad. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. My first daughter, Olympia, she's 1 month and 2 days old.
Well, congratulations. That's very good. Hope you have many, many, many more, right?
We'll see. I'm okay with just the one for the moment.
Right. So, so Greg, you opened the Uncommons in New York City. So if you would, tell us, what year was that you opened there?
Sure. Yeah, we've been open for almost 7 years, almost exactly, actually. 7 years.
Okay. And what part of the city exactly are you located in?
The Uncommons is located in Greenwich Village. And for those who don't know New York City all that well, we're right near New York University, NYU. We're right near Washington Square Park. Greenwich Village is an old neighborhood. It's been around forever. Folks call it the Village. And the Uncommons is sort of in the center of Greenwich Village. That is north of the financial district, south of Times Square, if that helps you get a general idea.
Okay. And now, were you the first board gaming cafe in New York City?
We were the first one in Manhattan. And the Brooklyn Strategist started up, and it's in Carroll Gardens. It started up just a little bit before we did. It didn't get its full cafe capacity until right around the same time. So yeah, we call ourselves Manhattan's first board game cafe.
Okay. And why do you think, maybe if you can go back, like in the beginning while you were thinking of openness, why do you think nobody had done this in New York City? I mean, New York City is, just has a little bit of everything, but to be missing, and again, I'm just speaking of Manhattan in particular, but to be missing a board game cafe seems strange. Why do you think that was?
Well, 7 years ago, it was a pretty cutting-edge concept. There weren't that many anywhere in the world, in fact. Snakes and Lattes, right? One of the ones that really brought the concept to popularity in Canada, certainly, and it's pretty well known beyond that now. They were only open maybe 8 years ago, almost 9 now, perhaps. So it's not like there were a lot of other board game cafes around. New York City didn't know what it was missing, in other words. And I was really excited to take the formula that I had sort of seen and heard about, and really extend it and expand upon it to bring it something uniquely New York City and uniquely Manhattan.
Oh, nice. And just so you know, and I'm sorry if any viewers out there, that's my cat back there. She's extremely loud. So if you hear that whining, it's not a baby or anything. It's a cat. So, she will be interrupting us during the stream.
What's her name?
Mittens.
Mittens.
Yeah, and the problem is she's like really deaf, not totally, but really. So she just gets really loud. She doesn't know how loud she is. So another thing, so by opening it, like you mentioned, Snakes and Lattes, because they were my inspiration as well for opening Meepleville here in Las Vegas. And you're right, they opened in 2010, so they hadn't been open that long. Now, in the thought process of opening in Manhattan, since it's got so many people, what was the business model? Like, was it because of volume of people, or what were the exact steps you might have laid out before you planned on opening the Uncommons?
Absolutely. So I'll go back and talk about our story a little bit in a little bit more detail. So I'm not a native New Yorker. I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from the Midwest, and I bounced around. I've lived in Honolulu, Hawaii. I've lived in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and Beijing. And I had some lucky opportunities to travel all over the world for work and for pleasure as well. And what I found was that I really enjoyed board games. I started some board game clubs. I enjoy a pretty wide variety. And when I moved to New York City, it's been about 9 years ago now, I found a board game meetup that I really enjoyed. The downside was that we were meeting at bars, and they were often dark. It was hard to, really enjoy a game when you're under dim light and trying to read the cards. Also, you were hauling around and lugging around your games everywhere with you. That was awkward and difficult. And I had a growing collection of several hundred board games. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, strongly suggested that I should find a place to put them that wasn't our closet. And so I did. I talked to some friends. They became business partners, and started looking for spaces. We created a business plan. It was clear that there was some demand for this sort of prospect. I had the focus and the idea to have it be also very friendly to competitive card games like Magic the Gathering. One of my partners was a Magic fan, a Magic player, and there weren't many great places in the city for a place, a population of many millions of people. There just weren't many great card shops, and so I wanted to add that to the formula. Wanted to sort of figure out how to run it in a cafe setting. How to take some of what I learned in China about how their businesses operate. A lot of the Chinese culture and style of restaurants and cafes centers around sort of density, about packing in people tightly, about making them feel welcome. It's warm and noisy is the idea. So I took all of this together, and we raised some money, all internal, all friends and family, and then started looking for spaces. It was tough to find the right place in New York. I knew we wanted to be around NYU. It was an area that was both central, tourist friendly, student friendly, but very expensive. I'm not going to lie. We pay more in rent than almost any other board game cafe in the world, certainly per square foot. And then I'll get to that in the future, but our next locations are certainly the most expensive board game cafes, not just per square foot, but just strictly, as far as I know, anywhere in the world. But there are advantages to that. We found a space that was formerly the Village Chess Shop. It had been in business for about 40 years. It was open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. This place was crazy. And it was also famous. Everyone played here. Anyone who was into chess would come by and pick up a game. Woody Allen filmed a movie there. Heath Ledger learned to play chess there. And so this place was an institution, and the guy who had founded it got sick. He was getting older, and it had fallen into sort of disrepair and had closed a couple of years prior to this all sort of starting up. So the space was available. I had walked by and had seen it, but there were no signs and no indication of how to get in touch with anyone for it. I couldn't tell what was going on, and so I toured, 120 other spots looking for the right one. Eventually, by just chance, walked by again. There was a sign up, called for the space, and within a week, we had sort of gotten a lease together and were ready to make the deal for the space. So it's really nice. Our block, Thompson Street, it was
Yes.
the home of the chess wars. There were two competing chess shops. The chess shop, the Village Chess Shop, right? The old guys, one of their employees had left after being sort of thwarted in his ambition and decided to start his own place across the street. And so the Wall Street Journal in the 90s wrote about the chess wars on Thompson Street.
Uh-huh.
And so, we're continuing this legacy of tabletop gaming. They didn't have beer, they didn't have wine, they didn't have a lot of food. This was a place where you could sit down and play board games and pay a small fee. And this was 35, 40 years ago, actually almost 50 at this point.
Right. So you first opened there. Now, because of the, just like you said, millions of people living right there in Manhattan, and of course being close to NYU, was it sort of easy in the beginning because of the numbers? Were you just able to kind of get volume customers in there right away?
No, I wouldn't say that, sadly. I wish it was quite that easy. we didn't have our beer and wine license when we first opened, and one of my business partners didn't think we needed it. I was strongly in favor. He was nervous about the legal liability, and we were not hitting our numbers or our metrics, and I was working really hard, and to a little avail, I would say. We were mildly successful, but rent and payroll and other expenses, it's a tough nut to crack, and we weren't getting there. And I always say the day we gained our beer and wine license is the day we became profitable. That was about a year in. And after that, it wasn't, I wouldn't say smooth sailing, but within a couple of months, we were net neutral. And then thereafter, we started getting wait lists every weekend. And so now it's safe to say that until the pandemic, we had 2 to 3 hour waits every weekend for the last 5 years.
Yes, yeah, I know the pandemic just killed everybody. That's a whole nother discussion.
I'm sure we'll get there and talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah. So I've been there, fortunately. I had a chance to visit your place. Now, of course, as you said, real estate in Manhattan is very expensive. A lot of businesses are very, very small.
Absolutely.
So what was the idea? And I know you said you learned from China, and that's probably a great place to learn how you said about the small and intimate gatherings, because it is such a tight place. So what was the maximum volume at the beginning when you first opened?
We played around with a bunch of different seating capacities and such, right? It's Tetris and puzzles in a game of inches, at least in our place. And in our initial sort of format, we had a small amount of retail and 500 games and some plastic tables and seating for maybe 45. But pretty quickly we realized how we could expand our retail selection and our game wall. So now we have had over 1,000 games in our collection for as long as I can remember, and have thousands more in the basement and now spread across our locations. So our library is immense and it's always growing, and we're always replacing games. But it's not countable anymore. We don't have a record because we add things so often to replace them, and where there's stored is mystery. In terms of retail, as well, we figured out how to put shelves above people's heads. So we're overwhelming. We are not shoppable. It is not where you're going to browse, nicely spaced out shelves. You're going to look up on the wall above you and very carefully ask a staff member who's going to grab a ladder and stand on someone's chair and grab the game from up top.
Right.
But it works, or at least it worked until the pandemic. Because it allows us to have as much retail as anywhere more or less I've ever been. We would cram 64 people in. That's how many seats we have, 64. And that is in about 880 square feet, right? You take away the counter space and the bathroom, that's all part of that 880. And you're left with the tightest density of seating that I've been to anywhere in the world, and it ties that of Tokyo, Japan subway systems. They have some sushi shops in the subways that seat 25 people in a similar amount of square footage that would be per person. So it's your elbow to elbow, packed in tight, and that's a terrible thing for these current conditions. But it was a wonderful thing until a few months ago.
Right. So let me ask you something about that then. So because New York City is so old, the old eastern part of the United States and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of the codes I noticed are different probably than other cities. So you have establishments and businesses, as you said, that many people in that small space. Are there grandfather kind of clauses that have been allowed to maybe exceed maximum capacity, and like your bathroom is tiny and you may not have access for wheelchair access and things like that? So what are some of those things that
wow, that's a huge lengthy topic of conversation.
Okay, but real quick, if you could just what are some of the things you're able to sort of get away with because you are in New York City? The short answer is less than you might think. You are grandfathered in some ways, but that comes with some downsides. You cannot
do modern construction. You can't update your walls and your windows, the major egresses. You can't do those things without losing that grandfathering capacity. So the minute you do that, you're under a new set of rules and regulations. So for instance, we don't have a fire suppression system in our space. Our building doesn't really. But that's because it's an all brick building from, you know, the 1920s or something, 1910 maybe even. Our ADA accessibility is limited, and we're not required to be completely compliant, but we did get a lawsuit filed against us saying that we weren't. So, you know, we've taken a bunch of steps, as many as we could. Our bathroom can never be ADA compliant. It's just not possible. The door isn't wide enough to get a wheelchair inside, and there's not enough space to turn around. So, you know, we did what we could in the physical constraints that we had to become accessible. Yeah, New York has a lot of regulations on codes. You know, the number of people that you can seat to then require you to have a bathroom. There are things called a permit of assembly. Anytime you go above 74-ish people in a space, the fire department gets involved, and then the buildings department, and there's all this permitting and applications and stuff that is necessary to go above that number. Below that number, and it's a different set of rules and regulations and more flexible.
Okay, and then you mentioned in the beginning that bringing in alcohol you felt was sort of the turning point, which helped with the revenue and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you could, out of 100%, and you said the retail is kind of small, what is the percentage of, say, just entrance and admission as opposed to, say, food and beverage?
Sure. Well, I think of the Uncommons and more broadly our businesses, including Hex and Company, having 4 or 5 main components, and I'll focus on the Uncommons here for a moment. We have food and beverage, including beer. We have retail sales. We have the walk-in seating fee, reservation fees, and gameplay fees. And then we also have events. Those would include things like tournaments for Magic Gathering, for Keyforge, for any number of games. So those are the 4 main revenue streams. And, you know, depending on whether it's Christmas time and retail's, you know, booming, or whether a new Magic set releases, or, you know, they'll fluctuate. But those 4 were pretty even often.
Okay, yeah, that's good, because that's the same thing with my business too. I have basically 3, like you said. I don't have the necessarily events as you do, but yeah, the food and beverage, the entertainment part, the admission or the memberships, and also the retail. And yeah, they do run generally in the same category. But you were right next to NYU, so is the population of your clientele, would you say it's majority college students or that college student age, or do you get like a diverse range of people?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty diverse. Our business would always, and it has always been, maybe 1/3 tourists, which is a really wide span, 1/3 students, and then that other third would be young professionals, neighborhood folks, and families, sort of more broadly, just coming in to get coffee or just to get a game to go. Those would be the main audiences, but it's certainly not a majority students, and tourists always played a super important role. That's, you know, that's pretty awkward in these times, but students left, left the city, and many of them have not come back. Tourists also left the city, and none of them have come back. So we're left with those other audiences, and without being able to run events or have indoor seating, or, you know, really some of the things along with it. Our revenue streams are cut from, you know, here to a fraction, and our audiences are cut from here to a fraction. So
right now, since you have such a small capacity too, like you had mentioned, and you try to get, of course, you want bodies, you know, butts in seats, as they say, to buy food and beverage, and also paying to come in.
Yeah.
What are some of the maybe restrictions that you may have as far as length of stay or real estate that a game may take up?
We were always trying to be as flexible and accommodating as possible when it came to games. We would have a copy of Twilight Imperium, but we wouldn't pull it down unless, you came Monday at 10 a.m. We would set it to the side. We would suggest you come back later, that sort of thing. In terms of length of time, that has changed over time for us. When we first started, it was, no problem, come stay as long as you want. And eventually it's gotten, a little tighter. After the pandemic, who knows? We'll see what our time limits and things turn out to be. We will adjust them as necessary, but our general philosophy has always been around 3 hours seems like a natural sort of place to limit people. So for Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, we would limit people to 3 hours on their stay. That would be a soft limit. If it was, again, 10 a.m., 11 a.m. when you came in, we probably wouldn't need your space back right away. So it's not like we've got the pickaxes or something ready, right, to get you out. But that would 3 hours generally worked.
Okay. And what are some of the more popular games? Now, of course, probably when you first opened or in the early beginning time with the college students, I'm sure they maybe played a lot of Cards Against Humanity and things like that. But what is, would you say, the kind of clientele you get? Are they more party, they more light, they more heavy, or do you have a good mix?
A pretty good mix. We'll see folks on date nights. That was a huge audience for us. They'll come in and they'll play Connect 4. They'll play Stratego. They'll play Battleship. They'll play Jenga, right? And that was a pretty consistent, pretty sizable audience. Our meetup groups, they will play the hot new heavy thing. They'll haul down Scythe and they'll, play whatever the cutting edge game is that came out last week. That was a pretty consistent audience. We would, set aside specific nights for those groups. Magic the Gathering was a big game, always has been, probably always will be. And then I'd say a lot of folks just came in to play Settlers of Catan, to play Ticket to Ride, to play that middleweight game with their family, or they were tourists and they weren't sure what to play. We had corporate events where, folks would play Codenames in a group of 15 people for 2 hours. It was never, and it never has been consistent, perhaps because of the wide audiences we have or we reach. But yeah, plenty of people play Cards Against Humanity and party games.
Yeah,
but it's not an overwhelming number, and the same is true for any other category of game, classics, heavy strategy.
Right. So now, as far as say marketing goes and getting the word out about finding out who the Uncommons was, what the Uncommons was when you first opened, being in Manhattan and the street you're on is fantastic. That whole neighborhood, Greenwich Village. For those of you who haven't been to New York, I'm from Connecticut, so I've spent a lot of time in New York City, and it's just phenomenal, that whole area. And what I'm asking is about, as far as marketing, do you have to spend a lot or focus on marketing in New York City, or because of sheer numbers, but the university, the area, the community, the street, and all that kind of stuff, is there just a lot of natural word of mouth marketing?
Yeah, we chose to have our marketing budget be our real estate budget, our rent, right? That may not work everywhere in the world or everywhere in the country, maybe even everywhere in the city. But where we were, we have beautiful storefront, beautiful frontage, 100,000 plus people walk by almost every day, or within, a couple of blocks, with a bunch of subway stops nearby. We spend zero on marketing. It's not that I don't believe it can be valuable. It's just, they say half of your, marketing money is wasted. You just never know which half. For us, the real estate was an easy sort of bet, safe.
Right. So now I don't want to talk about, I'm not getting to your other place yet. I'm still talking about just the Uncommons with this next question.
Okay.
So first of all, after you opened, were there any other board game cafes that did open in Manhattan before your second place?
No. In fact, it took years for even one to open. I think 4 years later, one opened in Astoria in Queens.
Okay.
That was sort of the next place that popped up. But
okay, because the reason I'm asking this question is because so you're the only one in Manhattan. Millions of people.
As of 4 years ago, yeah.
Correct. Well, I'm just going back to like in the beginning. So you're the only one in Manhattan Board Game Cafe. You're in Greenwich Village, and usually, like say it's in Vegas or other big cities or rural communities, most of people, I mean, the majority of people kind of shop and play in their area, their neighborhood. If there's a store close to them, they go there, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just wondering, what is that like in Manhattan? Do you get still just within an X amount of area, or are people coming from other boroughs or way at the other end of Manhattan to come to the Uncommons?
Yeah, that's a fair question. New York is a city and neighborhood. It can feel fairly provincial. There are plenty of people who don't go outside of their neighborhood that often. But if you were to travel, you're going to go to an area like Greenwich Village. It's a sort of a shopping area. It's a student area. It's a park, right? It's got the restaurants and it's got the bars. So it's not far from Times Square, and so anyone from all around New Jersey, upstate, right? You're going to come through Penn Station, you're going to come through Grand Central, or you're going to come from the outer boroughs, including Long Island, and you're probably going to end up near Midtown and lower Manhattan, the upper part of lower Manhattan, right? So anywhere between West 4th and 34th Street or even 42nd Street, anything in that area in the middle of the city is very accessible. It's very accessible to everyone from all over. That makes it a safe play. If you're in one of the other boroughs, whether it's Brooklyn or Queens or even the upper part of Manhattan in Harlem, or you're going to reach a fraction of the people, because most folks, if they're going somewhere, they're going to Midtown, right? They're going downtown. They're going where the stuff is.
Right, exactly. So now you've had Uncommons. You opened in 2000. I'm sorry, the year again, what was it?
2013.
2013. Okay. And you're doing very well and all that kind of stuff. And as you said, there was the Brooklyn Strategist in Brooklyn. And I went there also, had a chance to meet them, because before I opened Meepleville, I did my research, went to as many places as I could find out. And that was a unique place, a different place out there. And so it was really interesting. Now, how do you balance with the cafe being a date night, one time every 6 months, one time a year, a tourist dropping in, or being a community for a lot of regulars? So how do you balance that with your business model strictly with the Uncommons?
Sure. We would really focus on our regulars Monday through Thursday, right? Building those communities of a variety of different games. And then really focus on sort of the tourists and the date night and the occasional business on Fridays and Saturday nights when the neighborhood's hopping and everyone's out, especially those nights. And then Sundays would be, a little more flexible depending on the time of year. It'd be very family focused in the morning and a little more, event oriented maybe at night. Sundays were always a little more flexible.
So since you've been there since 2013, you have longevity, you have your regulars and all that kind of stuff. Are they sort of partners with you in the sense that they fully understand, hey, our days are Monday through Thursday, Friday, Saturday are for the tourists or the one-timers? So how is that relationship with them?
It's pretty good. Yeah, I'd say we reached an understanding with as many people as you can. You always have some customers who want to be more regular, right? Or think of themselves as more regular, who want to hang out. And I'm sure that will always, be the case no matter where you are in the world. But yeah, no, I think for the most part, we reached a good, reasonable balance. You have to.
Of course, yes.
And with anywhere.
Yes, you really do. Now, here's something else interesting, because as you mentioned, Greenwich Village, the kind of place it is with the bars, the restaurants, the shops, the walking, all that kind of stuff. How do you balance, because especially if people live there, they're in that neighborhood, they want to come and play a game, but yet they want to go down the street to this nice restaurant or a different type of food to eat and then come back to play? Do people just like, you move your feet, you lose your seat? Like, how does all of that work with the kind of neighborhood you're in for people coming and going?
Well, waitlisting was a thing. Reservations were a thing. So, a lot of folks would come right after dinner, and they'd grab dinner, pretty early, 6 or 7, and our busiest times would be, right after that, 7:30, 8 o'clock. You'd get that flood of customers. That was pretty normal. You'd get some pre-dinner folks too, especially if they were going to see a show afterwards. So we'd get some folks coming at 4:30, right? If they could make it, 5:15. They'd come and stay for even sometimes only an hour, and then rush off to food or a show.
Okay, and then how are you able to balance the events? So you said that's like one of the 4 kind of revenue streams for your business, but since your space is so small and you have such a small capacity in real estate area, how are you able to hold events when you still have like a throng of people, say, wanting to come in and play? How do you balance that?
Yeah, we would focus again events Monday through Thursday. We wouldn't hold many events on Fridays, just Friday Night Magic, which we would constrain ever so much more over time. It would start off, and we'd be like, come on in, play Magic as much as you want. And eventually, because it is a lower profit business, it was like, okay, come in at 3:30 and we have space for 8 people. That's eventually sort of where we got. And we wouldn't hold generally events on Saturdays at all, of course.
And then I asked you sort of about the diversity in age, right? Mm-hmm. About like the students and stuff. But since New York City in particular is such a cultural melting pot, what is the diversity of, say, different types or ethnic groups of people coming to the Uncommons? Have you noticed there are more than others? Some groups don't come, or like, are there certain games people play? Like, what have you noticed about the diversity, the ethnic diversity at the Uncommons?
It's, it's pretty crazily diverse. On an average day pre-pandemic, we would regularly hear 5 or 6 languages in a day, not usually at one time, but that'd be pretty normal. And it's not like I saw huge trends. There were lots of Europeans. There were folks from South America. We have our fans from Russia. We got our fans from Asia. Board games are pretty international, and New York's pretty appealing to people from all over the world.
Oh, absolutely. And then because one of the reasons I'm asking, sort of like a precursor of this question, is because you did say that the chess thing, and when I was there, I noticed there is one across the street, correct? So there's still a chess one across the street. So what about those people? Because a lot of times chess players are kind of just, laser focused, or game players may not be as hardcore in the chess because they know how like laser focused chess people are. But is there ever kind of a crossing between the two?
There's not a lot of crossover between those two audiences.
Right.
Chess people are chess people, and board gamers are often, more broad. Maybe something similar as poker players. Poker players seem to be very poker focused. They're not usually either chess players or board game players.
Right.
Folks are also very role-playing game focused. They don't love board games. They certainly don't love chess. Sure. They're role-playing gamers, and that's what they do. Magic the Gathering's the same way. I'd say 75% of our Magic the Gathering audience was Magic the Gathering players.
Period. End of story. Yep, that's
it. Yeah, that was that. That's where their money's going, right?
That's where their money's going.
Getting those cards, and role playing doesn't matter, chess doesn't matter, etc. So, you have these communities and these niches, and chess certainly was one of those and continues to be. We're happy to send people to the chess store across the street. They're looking for an interesting set. They have like hundreds of really cool chess sets.
Right.
Happy with their own business.
So now I just wanted to ask you, so now that you have been in business for several years and you all of a sudden, because now we're going to sort of transition and move into your Hex and Company and your partnership with I'm sorry, what's his name for the Brooklyn Strategist?
John Freeman.
John Freeman, that's right. Like I said, he's a very nice guy. Yeah, when I went there, Dr. John. Yeah, he's a child psychiatrist or something like
yeah,
that.
Former neuropsychologist. Yeah,
neuropsychologist. Yeah, he was very lovely when we met. He talked to me and my wife because again, I was interested in opening at that time and all that kind of stuff. So, what I want to kind of know is like, since the Uncommons is in Manhattan, and you talked about the expenses, like the rent and all that is extremely high. But obviously you're doing well because now the thoughts are coming into your mind, whether it was you who like planted the seed or somebody came to you, but now you're going to open up a second location. So are you crazy? Like, what was that all about? How did that come about?
Sure. So after about year, 2.5, we were profitable, making decent money. I didn't have to work there all that often. I had a staff I trusted and could focus on other things. That's when the idea of expansion sort of naturally came up. And I am sort of a networker by nature. I love talking to other people and other business owners and other small businesses. I feel like you can learn a lot. And I continue to try that. So I had been in touch with John Freeman from the Brooklyn Strategist and mentioned I was interested in maybe opening up a new location, maybe something around Columbia University. Would he be interested in working together? He said, hey, I've actually been thinking about doing the same thing. And it's one of those things that is very touchy. Entrepreneurs are often solo folks by nature. We left the corporate world in many cases and have avoided it because we want to work for ourselves, right? We want to be the masters of our own destiny, and we're entrepreneurs. So partnering like that means giving up control. And that is not an easy thing to do. It requires an immense amount of trust, and
right.
That's not easy to achieve.
It isn't, and not only that, not only do you have a partner, but you have a third, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's correct. I'll get there in just a moment. Yeah. So I reached out to Dr. John, and we started talking, and it was pretty casual at first. And he comes from a background, basically. An educational background. He wanted to get his kids into program. He's got 2 daughters, and he was looking for sort of after-school programs for them, and couldn't find one that he liked that was up to his snuff. One that would use board games and sort of activate different brain areas and had some research behind it. And so he decided to create one, and that formed the core of the Brooklyn Strategist, which is a very sort of different approach than I took, which is cram them in tight, make them have fun, give them something to do, and make sure they have some beer, some great craft beer while they do it. But both businesses can coexist, and both of us were seeing the opportunity to sort of to share the same space, the same overhead, the same staff, the same rent, and be able to capture all these business segments, right? So we start looking at each other's numbers, and we're like, what we are seeing, but the 2 of us don't feel quite like we're all we need. Even in our own skill sets, we still feel like we're missing something, like there's another step we can take. And so John has a sort of family friend. It turns out a kind of distant friend that had a background in real estate as an MBA, as a CFO, which was something John and I were not strong at, is the numbers part. And this gentleman, Mark Miller, had a passion for food as well. He was trying to start a smokehouse when I first met him, trying to build his own smokehouse for barbecued meats and smoked salmon and such. And neither John nor I are restaurateurs, and we felt we could up our food game. So between these, very different skill sets as an MBA finance guy and as a pretty strong, person who was interested in food, John brought us together, and we pretty quickly realized we had something that we could work together, and had the money, had the plan. We found something near Columbia University, and that was a natural sort of extension for both John's programming and for my interest in, and experience with college kids and running events and such.
Okay, so if just real quick, because even though like I've been to New York City several times, I'm not that familiar with the area. For the people watching, so tell me like geographically how far, whether it's miles, blocks, or whatever. So you are in Greenwich Village. How far away? Because Columbia University is still in Manhattan. How far away geographically is that from your current location?
Sure, it's about 100. We're at 110th Street, right? So 110 blocks ish, and the Uncommons is at West 3rd Street. So that's 107 blocks. Actually, it's pretty straightforward in New York. New York is nice that way. Number
right.
It's relatively straightforward. That equates to something like 10 miles, and that's the equivalent of a 25-minute subway ride.
Okay. So yeah. So now you're deciding, but not only are you going to around Columbia University, but is that a higher rent area of Manhattan?
No. The highest rent areas of Manhattan are Times Square, the areas around Times Square, and then maybe Financial District, parts of it, and Tribeca and Soho as well are pretty hot spots. Greenwich Village and the West Village are also very high rent. The Upper West Side is 2/3, maybe, the cost per square foot, something like that.
Okay, and then did you each have a particular sort of responsibility? Because as you said, Dr. John focused on like, say, maybe kids programs, or that was his specialty. Yours was like being around college students and sort of more craft beer party date night thing. And now you have this third partner coming in for food. So right now in the existing business, do you each have like 3 separate sort of areas of responsibility and expertise?
No, we started off that way a little bit, right? You sort of pick your area of expertise, and you're like, okay, you handle some of this. Mark handled real estate for years, so we gave him more of the construction responsibilities, for instance. I was really focused on retail, and so I handled all the game ordering and purchasing and merchandising and display and that sort of thing. And yes, John handled all the enrichment programs, summer camps, after school programs, that sort of thing. So those 3 things still continue. I still handle the retail, et cetera, but the other areas are largely overlapping. We all fight about beer and what we want and what we like. We all talk about menus. We all talk about build out and tables and how best to utilize the space and staff and HR and systems and procedures and everything else, right?
So when did Hex and Company officially open?
That'd be about 4 years ago.
Okay. And again, I'm sure just like, we have to sort of, the timeline is pre-March, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to forget these past couple months. So
I'm trying. I wish I could.
I know. So pre-March, after you opened, did you notice that it sort of had the same trajectory as the Uncommons, where at first you were missing this or this and that, blah, 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 and then you needed something for the boost? Or did you have lessons learned and sort of from day one, you were just rocking and rolling?
The Uncommons was born out of ignorance, essentially, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, and I had very little retail, no bar, no restaurant experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't, we made some very smart decisions. We got lucky in a bunch of ways, but there were enormous numbers of mistakes, right? And at Hex, with the strength of 3 people who kind of knew what they were doing, and John and I having 16 years of whatever it was, 12 years of board game cafe experience between us, and Mark having a good handle on the numbers and having a much richer budget. We had, between the three of us, we set aside something like $500,000, right? We didn't think we'd need it, but we had it ready just in case. And we negotiated with Columbia University directly before settling on a different space. And we knew how to go to restaurant auctions, right? We knew how to get good deals. I knew all the suppliers for games. So we opened and we were break even immediately, operationally profitable within a month or two or something. It was incredible.
And so what have you noticed, since they are in different areas, and that's such the fantastic thing about New York City, right, is each neighborhood, each area has its own flavor, its own whatever. What kind of flavor or what kind of demographic is different around Hex and Company up at 110th as opposed to down around 3rd or 4th where you are at the Uncommons? And different from where Dr. John is out in Brooklyn.
For sure. Yeah, Dr. John reaches a family audience, right? Kids and families that we don't reach any of the other three places quite as much. I should also mention we actually opened up another Hex location on the Upper East Side. So that opened up almost exactly a year ago. I was just looking through some pictures, and 1 year ago tomorrow, we started putting up our signage. We weren't open yet, but so that's on the Upper East Side at 76th and First Avenue, and that's even a very different neighborhood, right? Yeah, still, New Yorkers are New Yorkers. The Uncommons hits the tourist audience. It's the only one that hits the tourist audience like it does. But beyond that, all three of them see a good mix of young professionals, of students, and of kids and families.
Okay, and then if you could take us back to opening Hex and Company. If you could, I'm just going to try to narrow you down to maybe 3, okay? Because, of course, you know as well as I do, like the same thing. I wasn't a restaurateur, blah, 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 but I opened because of the passion, the board game cafe is something I've always wanted to do. But I'm going to narrow you down to 3, maybe, if you can come up with them. What were the 3 big, like huge, just mind-blowing lessons you took with you from the O'Commons to the Hex and Company that you really learned, and you're like, okay, yes, lesson 1 I learned, 2, 3, I'm not going to make that mistake again, and this is definitely going to make a difference moving forward?
Sure. The first thing I learned, and this is important for all types of businesses, not just board game cafes, is make sure you have enough money. I don't know the statistic offhand, but a very large percentage of businesses fail because they run out of money in their first year. They don't make it past that first year because they just don't have the funds. And that's tricky because sometimes you need a year to grow. You need time to build that audience. It just happens organically. It takes a little time. And if you can hit a death spiral. You don't have enough money to get the new games, so then people don't come and they don't buy things, so you don't have enough money to, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure you have the funding, and that's number 1, for sure. A couple of other things that I've learned that are maybe more about board game cafes. A variety matters. I was, always a fan of that, but consistency matters more. A couple of examples, like downtown at the Uncommons, I love weird sodas and weird drinks, right? So I would always try to change things, but changing things sort of arbitrarily leads to a whole host of difficulties. You got supply chains to manage, you got menus to update, you got staff who don't know the drinks, you got to fix the systems and the pricing, and then you go to try to order it again because it's people like it and they're out of it, and maybe the supplier has minimums. So at Hex we stripped that down. Instead of having 40 options, we'd have 10 or 12, and we would change 3 of them. right? The same is true for beers. You can we have a great beer list. It's 20 plus options wide. You'll have something for everyone, but around 10 of them stay pretty consistent so that people can find something that they like and then we'll be there when they come back rather than having to learn everything new all the time. So that was something that was, and I'm still learning that. The same is true for board games. There are 5,000 released every year, right? Some enormous number. You're not going to carry them all. You're not going to get a copy of every single one. And balancing the fact that you sell a ton of Catan and a ton of Ticket to Ride and a ton of Cards Against Humanity with that long tail approach, having some of those, games, picking that inventory carefully, but not trying to hit everything, that's tough. And I'm still learning that lesson all the time.
Okay, so I think you gave me two. I don't know if you, because the first one, I was writing these down. You said is funding. I agree with that like 1,000%. That is definitely one of the big reasons that businesses do fail or go out, because they are underfunded. So yes, absolutely, funding is number one. Consistency, you mentioned, for number two, and I would wholly agree with that as well. That in order to maintain, because again, you're going to have regulars, people who know you, and that's why people go to X restaurant every 2 or 3 months, because they know they're going to get this type of food, this type of this, and the same type of experience and all that kind of stuff too. So can you come up with maybe a third one?
Absolutely. And the third one, I'll mention customer service, and that is an easy answer that you'll hear, I'm sure, again and again. And I'll try to be a little bit more specific, because one of the strengths of our operation is something I didn't think about, I didn't consciously set out to achieve, but it is consistent staff as well, and customer service, meaning we try to go above and beyond. We don't necessarily, how should I put this? For a lot of businesses, customer service means the customer is always right. And in a game store, that is a little trickier. And in New York City, that's a little different. So our approach to customer service was always a little more New York than I think some places are. It's not always that the customer is right. That's not what I mean. It's that you will try to make sure everyone has a good time. And that is its own form of difficulty. It's its own form of challenge. You cannot please everyone all the time. We do not try.
Yes, of course, because there are so many different people you're trying to deal with. And, a lot of times, it's one of those kind of cliches, but you sort of got to say it. It's the 80-20 rule, right? Yeah. That's just.
Absolutely. Yeah. And 20% of people, they're not going to have fun no matter what. And
exactly.
And let them go, and don't worry about those customers. They're not your customers. Don't worry about it. Focus on that 80%. Make sure they have a good time. They'll come back. Make sure your staff know this.
Absolutely. And
every single person, I don't expect you to. It's fine if you don't.
Correct. And I would agree with you 100%. And I would agree with you about that as well, the customer service, because that's what I have built Meepleville on. And I'm honest, and I tell people, hey, listen, again, with the three different revenue streams, the food and beverage, retail, or the admission membership, you have the events or whatever, so you can relate the same thing. I tell people, listen, you could buy a game cheaper on Amazon, get delivered to your door. You could probably buy a game cheaper at another store here in town. Food. I'm not a restaurant. You can literally go across the parking lot and probably get better food, better cuisine. Nobody's coming to my place to eat, so it's not that either. But what I can sell you that I do think I have is an experience. And that's what I concentrate on, which essentially is / customer service. Yeah. I'm providing a great experience, whether you're just coming in to get a tour, to look around, to buy a game. We're very knowledgeable. I go to all the board game conventions. I play a lot of games, do a lot of research, all that kind of stuff, run a convention. But yes, it is making people feel special, because they are, even in a place like Manhattan, which I'm not going to say people in New York or Manhattan, their time is more valuable. But what I mean is there are so many options in Manhattan. So for somebody to come to your place, you damn well better give them customer service, right? Like good customer service.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's really, really good. And so now, because we had a little bit of time left, Your third one that you mentioned you opened. So you went from Greenwich Village up to near Columbia University. Where was the third one?
The Upper East Side, 76th and First Avenue.
Okay, and what were the flavor changes from the original Hex and Company to this second one?
Yeah, so Hex West, as we call it now, is just big. It's big and spacious. It's 3 times the size of the Uncommons, and it has draft beer, right? We got a kegerator, and it has a fancy oven that meant we could up our food. And it's got, 4 times the amount of retail or something. It's got magic singles program, right? It did it just took everything and raised it up a notch because we had additional space. And that meant, we could just do more. We had additional money. And that meant we could just do more. So from interior, we had a basement. So now we can, store things and carry, inventory in numbers we couldn't before, as an example. So that was Hex West. Hex East allowed us to add full liquor for the first time, allowed us to add a full kitchen with a vent, and a hood, which allows fried foods. We were smoking our own salmon, right? Making our own pastrami and bacon in-house. We had boozy milkshakes. We had a fantastic milkshake program. We had a cocktail program where we trained folks, and we worked with both a celebrity chef of sorts and a really good cocktail guy to create a bar program. We had 2 different styles of ice machine, right? And we cared deeply about our pebble ice and our big ice cubes for your cocktails. We had glassware and a dishwasher. And step it up again, just get to that next level. And, that meant sacrificing on the retail side in a way. 76th and First is not a particularly retail heavy area. So we narrowed down that section. For instance, we narrowed down the board game library a little bit. It was a former diner, so we changed our makeup to fit the neighborhood a little bit better, a little more friendly, a little more approachable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so have you noticed a shift in your customers or clientele? And what I mean by that, were any of the 3, say the Uncommons or Dr. John's place in Brooklyn had their customers, their fans, their clientele, and since you can kind of navigate New York pretty easily with the subway system and all the public transportation, have you noticed that people maybe who are regulars at Uncommons are like, you know what? The East is more me. This is what I've been looking for, or the West is more me. Have you noticed any of that?
It's pretty easy to get around, but people still like the convenience of the things near them. So, unless you're a Magic gamer looking for singles, if you live in Greenwich Village, you're going to go to the Uncommons. Our pricing isn't, all that different between the 4 stores. Communities are a little different, but still, if, we see enough people, we'll try to support that community. So outside of very, specific things like the Magic Singles program, I don't think we get a lot of regulars who bounce between the stores or have changed, store loyalty because of their amenities or features yet. East Side was only open for about 6 months when the pandemic hit. It didn't get a chance to really quite create that crowd or group of regulars yet, so it's hard to know. I will say that one audience that has changed dramatically over the last 7 years since the Uncommons opened is role-playing games. D&D was a very small program, very small thought at the Uncommons. We didn't set aside, we carried a couple of books, and that was that. I don't know that world that well. That was part of it. My business partners didn't either. But the Brooklyn Strategist did a little bit more, always has. And then when we opened at the Upper West Side, Hex West, we, put some serious effort, serious thought, and serious consideration into role-playing games. Set aside enormous amounts of shelf space, and that became one of the hottest product categories, right? We now have 200 types of dice. We carried 30 role-playing games beyond D&D. We carry the full line of D&D merchandise. We have 300 SKUs of Knowles-Orr's minis, right? We carry some paint racks and paints and paintbrushes, none of which we have at the Uncommons, and very little of which we have at the East Side. So there's that audience that is just embraced Hex West very warmly, and is super exciting.
It is, yeah, it is fantastic. It has a big explosion, and it's such a great thing. It's a great way of bringing a lot of different types of people together for a common cause. Role playing is. So, closing out, Greg, I would just like you to pretty much just let us know, let the community know, and everybody who watches these, what the future of the board gaming cafe industry relating to you is going to be like coming out of this pandemic or in the future. I hope you're able to survive and keep the 3 stores open, but please, if you could, just let us know the forecast for your board gaming involvement in the New York City area in the future.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we will survive. Thankfully, like I said, you gotta have those funds to draw upon in tough times, and this is probably the toughest time any business of any kind, unless you're Amazon, or a supermarket, has ever faced.
Jeff Bezos needs more money, right? Yeah,
exactly. If you're a restaurant or a bar, a small retailer, this is the apocalypse of sorts, and I'm seeing businesses go out of business by the hundreds here in New York City, and it's very sad. I hope that the city can rise like a phoenix. I expect it to. Where New Yorkers are a hearty bunch, and tourists want to travel. This will be, the home of culture and finance, no matter what happens. So we'll get back to it. The board game cafe business, that's a little trickier for the next 6 months. It's a lot of touching of pieces. It's a lot of people in the space. It's a lot of people breathing in events for hours. Right, more dangerous than a movie theater in many ways. Fewer number of people, perhaps, but still, you're closer together for a longer period of time. 3-4 hours often for a tournament. So it's tough. A lot of companies have canceled all of their events for the remainder of 2020 and into 2021, and I support that, as awkward and difficult as it is for all of us. But board gaming retail thrives, and it continues to. People will want to get out and drink. They'll want to get out of their houses and away from their families for a little while, and get out to places once it's safe to do so.
Yep. No, absolutely.
So we'll come back. The board gaming cafe industry in general will be back. I think some of the weakest will have unfortunately not made it through. That's true for every business sector.
Correct.
And I hope the ones that do come out are stronger because of it. And that, you had months to stay at home and play board games and jigsaw puzzles with your family. And hopefully some people, hopefully there's a bit more of an audience there. Hopefully it's grown a little bit. You got tired of Netflix and picked up Catan. Fingers crossed that audience continues to grow. I think we pivoted to online programming. In a way that I'm not sure most board game cafes were able to or could. We host what is probably the world's largest role-playing game community that is professional. We have over a dozen professional dungeon masters, some of whom are full-time employees who get paid just to play D&D, right, and to run D&D games. And so that program we pivoted to completely online. It's largely subscription-based, and that audience has stuck around. Kids, adults, ongoing games once a week or once a month. I am thrilled that audience has continued to show up and support us, and as such, we're really investing in that online role-playing space. I think there's a lot to be done there. And so that's hopefully one of the silver linings of this pandemic is some new opportunities.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, I'm so glad that the future looks bright. And the Uncommons, the Hex and Company, Brooklyn Strategists will all be around in the future, providing great entertainment for all the people in the greater New York City area. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with you. But ladies and gentlemen, one more time, this is Greg May, the founder of the Uncommons and from Hex and Company. So I'll be right back with you, Greg.
Thank you, Tim. Take care.
Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us. That was another episode of Meepleville Meets, and we got to learn a lot about the board gaming community in New York City with, we can arguably say, the pioneer of that in the largest city here in America. Well, again, thank you for joining us at Meepleville Meets. We'll see you again soon with another episode. Take care.